It's actually the people around the whole world logging onto Netflix last night to find not one, not two, but 3 episodes from the new Harry and Meghan documentary. And after years of speculation, we got to hear their side of the story, their relationship, and also what happens beyond the tabloid.
The palace didn't stay quiet this time. It delivered its answer with the cold finality of a door locking shut. Meghan's final appeal had reached William, and by the next morning the response was clear. No, not delayed, not softened, and not handed off to advisors. It was rejected. Inside the royal household, that single decision landed like a moment everyone had quietly feared, but could no longer avoid. Before we go any deeper into what this could mean for the royal family, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan read the response twice, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to stand still. Her final private appeal, a personal request seeking limited royal access, recognition at selected family occasions, and a path back into official palace communication, had not been left to lawyers, aides, or palace officials. William had answered it himself. That mattered because this was far more than an ordinary family disagreement. Royal access meant being welcomed into official royal spaces and recognized as part of the working royal circle. Official palace communication referred to the formal system through which senior royals and trusted aides exchange messages that carry real importance inside the monarchy. Meghan understood exactly what that meant. She hadn't been ignored. She had been refused. William sat alone before the decision left his desk, and for a brief moment, the future king looked less like a man taking control and more like a brother carrying an impossible burden. He likely knew Meghan would be deeply disappointed. He likely understood Harry would feel backed into a corner, but he also appeared to believe the palace had reached a line it could not cross again. Meghan's appeal asked for a way back. His response closed that path. When he placed the signed document on the desk, the movement was quiet, almost invisible. Yet its impact reached far beyond that room. The statement offered no comforting language, no family warmth, and no hint that the decision might be revisited. It simply stated that the matter would receive no further consideration, and those words immediately changed the mood inside the palace. One senior aide reportedly paused after reading the phrase. He had seen firm statements before, but this one felt final. No further consideration did not suggest a pause. It suggested the process had reached its end. It meant that any future request would face the same outcome. Meghan looked at those words until they seemed heavier than the paper itself, while William carried the weight from the opposite side. Harry now faced a painful choice between frustration and heartbreak. Charles would once again confront the family peace he had reportedly hoped time might restore. Catherine would understand why such firm boundaries had been drawn around her family, while also recognizing the emotional cost behind them. Once William's decision left his desk, everyone connected to Meghan's appeal had to face what this moment truly represented. Behind the formal palace language stood real people dealing with real pain. Meghan wasn't simply reading a refusal. William wasn't simply signing one. Harry wasn't merely watching events unfold from the sidelines. Charles wasn't just receiving another update. Each of them carried a different version of the same family divide, one that had now become part of royal policy. What began as a personal request had grown into something much larger. Meghan had not asked for a complete return to royal life. Instead, she sought something far more limited. Yet even that request carried enormous weight. She wanted a controlled return to palace communication, the formal channel used by royal households, senior aides, and official offices. She also hoped for limited recognition during selected family occasions. It wasn't a request to restore everything from the past. It was a request that suggested the door had not been permanently closed. Inside the monarchy, recognition has always meant far more than receiving an invitation or appearing on an official list. It signals who still belongs. If William personally refused that request, it naturally made the decision feel far more personal than if it had simply come from an unnamed palace office. William appeared to carry the decision like a heavy responsibility resting on his shoulders. He may have believed he was protecting the future of the monarchy, while also knowing the decision would affect Meghan and, through her, Harry as well. This was no longer simply about choosing between compassion and frustration. It had become a choice between family relationships and the long-term stability of the institution. That mattered because even a small exception could create new pressure, while every private request had the potential to become a public controversy. Harry understood that reality too, even if accepting it was incredibly difficult. He found himself caught between Meghan's disappointment and the possibility that his brother believed this decision was necessary, leaving him trapped as William's answer came down like stone. Harry wanted to stand up for Meghan, but he could no longer pretend the palace still moved according to his wishes. Charles read the summary without saying a single word. The king slowly lowered the document, as though every sentence had added years to his shoulders. He carried the heartbreak of a father and the responsibility of a monarch, yet neither role offered him any peace. Catherine saw the situation through a different lens. She understood that William's decision would not only shape Meghan's future, but also strengthen the boundary protecting their family. Once family access became a source of pressure, even the youngest members of the royal household could be drawn into conflicts they never asked for. Camilla quietly watched the room, and the queen consort seemed to recognize what others were only beginning to realize. William's resolve had changed. He could still feel sadness. He could still carry disappointment, but he was no longer willing to change course. The silence that followed the summary spoke louder than any public statement ever could. Meghan had asked for a narrow path back. William had closed that path completely. Harry stood on one side of the divide, torn between anger and grief, while Charles stood on the other, unable to repair what duty now appeared to have sealed. Catherine recognized the emotional cost. Camilla recognized the shift in authority. And throughout the palace, many sensed that something fundamental had changed. But before the monarchy reached this point, before William's answer became final, there was one private incident that reportedly changed everything. To understand why he ultimately said no, the palace had to look back at the moment when trust appeared to break down. Nearly every royal controversy has one moment that later seems far more important than it first appeared. A single room, a single sentence, a pause that lasted just a little too long. According to this account, Meghan's appeal was shaped by a private reception connected to a children's charity, where a conversation that was expected to remain confidential was later shared with senior palace officials. From that point forward, reconciliation reportedly became far more difficult. Meghan attended the reception, believing it could show she still had a place, even if only at the edge of royal life. The children's charity event carried special importance because occasions involving families and future generations are carefully managed within the monarchy. Catherine had been given a leading role during the event, placing her at the center of future family-focused work, where the presence of the Wales family would naturally receive significant attention. Meghan reportedly noticed that decision, and according to this version of events, it reopened old frustrations. She is said to have privately questioned a palace aide, asking why Catherine continued to receive protection, support, and prominent roles while she remained outside the royal circle. The aide reportedly tried to keep the discussion calm, but the conversation continued. Meghan is said to have asked whether William's office was intentionally keeping her away from official royal settings involving the Wales children, and that question immediately changed the tone of the exchange. The Wales children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, occupy a unique place within the monarchy because their public lives are closely protected as future members of the royal family. That made the subject especially sensitive, since discussions involving them were viewed differently from disagreements between adults. According to this account, the palace aide later documented the conversation in a formal reception summary, a routine record used to note sensitive discussions for senior royal offices. The document did not use dramatic language. It simply preserved what had happened. Catherine later reviewed the summary and quietly absorbed its contents. She did not react with anger or demand immediate action. Instead, she listened carefully, and her silence carried its own message. From her perspective, the issue no longer appeared to be only about recognition. It had become a question of maintaining clear boundaries around her family. William reportedly received the same summary soon afterward, and for a moment, he gripped the edge of his desk before responding. His reply was calm but unmistakably firm. In his view, private family boundaries could no longer be treated as something open to negotiation. One phrase reportedly became especially important inside the file: continued pressure around family access. Once those words became part of the record, the discussion shifted away from reconciliation and toward protecting established boundaries. William no longer appeared to see a request that could simply be softened. Instead, he reportedly saw a situation that, if left unresolved, could continue to grow. Meghan wanted the door reopened, But William now appeared to believe that door led too close to Catherine, too close to their family, and too close to the future he felt responsible for protecting. Once he connected the earlier events to Meghan's final appeal, any remaining hesitation seemed to disappear. The past had given him what he believed was a reason to stand firm. Now Meghan wanted to hear that answer directly from him. The room itself was not especially large, yet the decision inside it felt enormous. Meghan entered believing there was still room for discussion. William walked in already convinced there would be none. There were no cameras, no public smiles, and no audience to soften the atmosphere. Across a polished table sat two people who had once shared the same royal family, now facing the reality of how much had changed. Meghan remained composed in the beginning because she had not come to plead for another chance. She had come to challenge a decision before it became completely final. Inside the palace, private meeting rooms are where important conversations can influence official decisions long before the public ever hears about them. That mattered because Meghan still believed one honest conversation might change the outcome. William entered with only one senior aide waiting outside the door, and even that quiet detail carried meaning. He wanted the meeting to remain personal enough for direct conversation, but structured enough to avoid confusion afterward. Meghan understood that balance, and so did William. She asked why there was no longer a path back, and although her voice stayed calm, the disappointment behind it became harder to hide with every response. Meghan spoke about family recognition, limited participation in selected occasions, and what she viewed as basic respect after years of separation. William listened carefully, but according to this account, he did not change his position. He explained that trust could not simply return because someone asked for it after boundaries had, in his view, been crossed. That mattered because the monarchy depends on public confidence as much as personal relationships. It also mattered because every exception could set a new precedent. If one private appeal succeeded, future boundaries might become harder to defend. William chose his words carefully, fully aware that one careless sentence could deepen the divide. Meghan raised one final question, asking why even limited recognition during family occasions had become impossible, and the atmosphere shifted once the Wales children became part of the broader discussion. George, Charlotte, and Louis stand at the heart of the monarchy's future, and William and Catherine have consistently placed great importance on protecting their privacy. Meghan noticed the change in William's expression. He did not raise his voice or show visible anger. He didn't have to. From that point forward, his tone reportedly became even firmer, reflecting what he believed was his responsibility to protect his family. Then came the moment that appeared to settle everything. William slowly placed his pen on the table before making it clear that Meghan's appeal was denied, not delayed. That quiet movement seemed more powerful than any emotional reaction. Meghan fell silent because there was an enormous difference between postponed and denied. One suggested there might still be hope. The other suggested the decision had reached its conclusion. William also explained that any future communication would move only through formal palace channels, meaning official procedures handled by palace staff rather than personal requests. Meghan had hoped for a personal answer. Instead, she was left with a formal royal boundary. When she walked out of that room, the question no longer seemed to be whether William held influence inside the palace. The question had become how much authority he was now prepared to exercise. Power inside the monarchy rarely arrives with dramatic speeches or public confrontations. It often moves quietly through signed documents, carefully chosen language, official records, and the silence of people who understand how the institution works. William's reported decision on Meghan's final appeal was presented not as a single, isolated moment, but as another sign that the future king was stepping more confidently into his role. According to this version of events, William's office assumed control of the appeal file immediately after the meeting ended, and that alone signaled where responsibility now rested. An appeal file is the written record containing a request, the responses it receives, and the internal notes senior officials use while considering important decisions. This particular file reportedly mattered because it touched on future royal operations, family access, and official palace protocol. Royal operations refer to the daily systems that determine who attends events, who receives official briefings, and who participates in public duties. Protocol refers to the long-established rules that guide royal conduct and preserve stability within the institution. Because Meghan's request touched each of those areas, William reportedly chose not to leave the matter open for further uncertainty. Charles was informed of the outcome, but the final decision remained with William. The king quietly read the completed wording before lowering his eyes, fully aware of what it represented. Another line had been crossed within the royal family, and this time, a father's emotions could not outweigh royal responsibility. For years, Charles had reportedly hoped that time and distance might ease the divisions that had grown within the family, but the document in front of him suggested otherwise. William had not simply rejected Meghan's request. He had signaled that, in his view, the future of the monarchy could no longer revolve around unresolved personal conflicts. That mattered because disagreements inside the royal family become much larger once they begin influencing official decisions. After the meeting, Catherine watched William closely, and what she saw was not celebration or satisfaction. Instead, she saw someone carrying the exhaustion that often follows an incredibly difficult choice. It was the kind of weariness that comes when a person stands by a decision but still feels the emotional cost. Catherine likely understood why William believed he had to act. Meghan's appeal was no longer just about one person seeking recognition. From William's perspective, it had also become connected to protecting the Wales family and preventing private tensions from growing into public pressure. Catherine understood that protecting her family sometimes meant allowing William to shoulder the criticism himself. William understood that as well, making the silence between them feel even heavier. The palace legal advisors then reviewed the next steps with careful precision. A legal team inside the palace is responsible for ensuring official decisions follow established procedures, remain properly documented, and are difficult to challenge through formal processes. According to this account, their recommendation was straightforward. Any future communication connected to Meghan's request would move only through restricted channels. Restricted channels are carefully controlled communication routes where messages are reviewed before reaching senior members of the royal household. Then came the note that reportedly changed everything. The appeal was marked closed. In practical terms, that meant it could not be reconsidered without William's approval. Meghan had asked for a path back. William had instead approved a system designed to keep that decision firmly in place. When news of the restriction reportedly reached Harry, the emotional fallout arrived faster than many inside the palace may have expected. The official wording had been prepared in London, but the first personal reaction came from the man Meghan had hoped would continue standing beside her through every setback. Harry did not need a public announcement to understand what had happened. He recognized it before Meghan even spoke. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. The silence told part of the story, and then came the words, "Denied. Final. No way back." For one brief moment, Harry was no longer viewed as a prince, a public figure, or a headline. He was simply a husband watching what he believed was the final connection to his former royal life disappear. Meghan explained that William had rejected her final appeal, and those words settled heavily between them. Her final appeal referred to the last private request seeking limited access to royal communication and recognition at selected family occasions. That mattered because the issue extended beyond titles or public appearances. It raised the question of whether Meghan could still maintain any formal connection to the royal family. Harry immediately understood the broader meaning. If Meghan remained outside those structures, then his own separation from royal life would likely feel even more permanent. Her position had always been closely connected to his future, and William's decision affected both of them at the same time. Before anger arrived, Meghan reportedly felt something even deeper: humiliation. It might have been easier to accept a rejection from an anonymous palace office, but according to this version of events, the answer had come directly through William's authority. She had expected distance. She had expected delays. What she had not expected was such a firm conclusion. Harry noticed the disappointment on her face, and frustration quickly rose inside him. Yet, almost as quickly, that frustration gave way to something quieter. He knew his brother well enough to recognize the difference between a temporary disagreement and a carefully considered final decision. William had not acted in the heat of the moment. He appeared to have weighed the consequences and accepted them before reaching his conclusion. Still hoping there might be one remaining path, Harry reportedly contacted a palace source who had responded to him during difficult moments in the past. This time, however, no reply came. Whether intentional or simply a reflection of changing circumstances, the silence carried its own significance. If communication had indeed become more restricted, it suggested that messages were now being filtered through official procedures before reaching senior royals. Meghan watched Harry make another attempt. And when the second silence followed the first, it seemed to hurt even more than the original refusal. Meghan had received the rejection on paper. Harry seemed to be experiencing it in real time. As far as he could tell, Charles made the situation even more painful by remaining silent. Harry waited for some kind of sign from his father, a private message, a quiet word of support, anything that suggested the king might step in. Nothing came. That silence hurt him even more than William's refusal because, in Harry's eyes, a brother might draw a hard line, but a father was supposed to leave at least one door open. Eventually, Harry realized Charles was not going to reverse the decision. Meghan reached the same conclusion, and the room suddenly felt much smaller. Yet one final conversation still remained, the one that could determine whether the brothers were simply drifting apart or whether the divide had become permanent. Before the public knew anything, Harry and William reportedly had one last private exchange with no official palace wording left to soften the moment. Some arguments explode with shouting, others end in complete silence. According to this account, this one ended with a long pause. Harry wanted emotion. William offered certainty. There were no aides standing between them and no carefully prepared statements. Just two brothers who shared the same childhood, the same family history, and now stood on opposite sides of a divide neither seemed able to cross. Harry reached out to William directly because he no longer believed official palace communication could carry the conversation he wanted to have. Palace channels are the formal routes where messages move through aides, private offices, and approved wording before reaching senior royals. Harry wanted to avoid all of that. He wanted to speak to his brother without anyone standing in the middle. He reportedly asked whether Meghan's rejected appeal could still be reconsidered for the sake of family rather than the institution itself. To Harry, the monarchy had already taken enough from their relationship. William listened, but he did not provide the answer Harry had hoped for. According to this account, he explained that the appeal would not be reopened because family relationships could not become a way to avoid decisions that had already been made. Harry struggled to accept those words. His voice reportedly cracked as he asked whether there was truly nothing left between them. In that moment, the anger gave way to something much deeper. It sounded like grief. William paused before responding, and that silence suggested he was not taking satisfaction from the situation. He was not trying to hurt his brother for the sake of winning an argument. Instead, he appeared to believe he was carrying the difficult responsibility of saying what no one else wanted to say. From his perspective, affection could not erase responsibility, and shared history could not erase decisions that, in his view, needed to stand. A brother could still care deeply while refusing to change course. William then reportedly explained what he believed sat at the heart of the decision. He told Harry that protecting Catherine and their family had become one of the key reasons for refusing Meghan's appeal. That immediately changed the tone of the conversation. Catherine's role extended beyond being William's wife. As Princess of Wales, she stands at the center of the future royal family, and stability around her carries wider importance for the monarchy. George, Charlotte, and Louis represent not only William's children, but also the next generation of the institution itself. Harry understood what William meant before he was ready to accept it. Meghan's request was no longer being viewed only as a personal appeal. According to William's reasoning, it had become connected to protecting the future of his family. Harry fell silent, and something seemed to change in that moment. He reportedly realized William did not see the decision as revenge or punishment. Instead, William appeared to view it as a boundary intended to protect what he believed came next. In his mind, the future of the monarchy had to take priority over old guilt and unresolved family pain. That choice left both brothers carrying emotional scars. William did not reopen the door, and Harry did not force it. Two brothers who once shared the same grief now faced very different futures. Once their conversation ended, the palace could no longer keep the decision away from public attention. By the time newspapers and broadcasters began reporting the story, the private emotions behind it had already hardened into a national talking point. Reports spread early in the morning, and many across Britain woke to headlines that felt less like celebrity gossip and more like a major royal development. Outside Buckingham Palace, people stopped to read the reports on their phones. Some reacted with surprise. Others believed the outcome had become inevitable. Meghan's image appeared alongside William's in newspaper coverage, while one headline captured the mood surrounding the story. No way back. Moments like these become significant not only because of palace decisions, but because of the public conversation that follows them. Moments like these become historic not only because of what the palace says, but because of what people believe its silence means. The newspaper showed Meghan with a serious expression, William looking firm, and between them sat the message that quickly became impossible to ignore. In the eyes of many, William had done more than reject a request. He had drawn a clear line the entire country could see. Within minutes, one morning broadcaster described it as the strongest sign yet that William's era had already begun, and that comment transformed what had been a private family matter into a national conversation. Supporters of Meghan viewed the reported decision very differently. Many argued the palace had chosen firmness over compassion. From their perspective, Meghan had asked only for limited recognition and instead received a final rejection. Others strongly disagreed. Royal supporters argued that William had finally established clear boundaries after years of uncertainty. They believed the future king was signaling that access to the monarchy could not be regained through continued pressure. That mattered, because public confidence plays a major role in how the monarchy is viewed, and confidence can weaken if rules appear inconsistent or driven by emotion rather than principle. Very quickly, the debate grew beyond Meghan herself. The conversation became about the monarchy as a whole. Should it show forgiveness openly or quietly protect its own long-term stability? Outside Buckingham Palace, small groups gathered near the gates, discussing the reports among themselves. Some believed Harry would never truly accept the outcome. Others felt Charles should have become involved before the situation reached this point. The king's absence from the reported decision only strengthened the impression among many observers that William had become the leading force behind the palace's direction. A brief palace statement reportedly followed, explaining that any future requests would move only through formal channels. Formal channels refer to official communication handled through palace aides and established procedures rather than private personal appeals. The wording sounded measured and controlled, yet many believed its message was unmistakable. According to that interpretation, Meghan would no longer be able to seek direct access through personal conversations alone. William's name became closely connected to the entire story. To many readers, he represented the boundary that had now been drawn. Meghan became the public face of a closed door. Charles became the silence that many people continued trying to interpret. Harry, despite not appearing at the center of every headline, remained deeply connected to the emotional side of the story, because every new report appeared to place even more distance between him and the family he once knew. Yet, beyond the headlines and public reactions, perhaps the biggest question remained inside the palace itself. What had this decision truly cost the royal family? According to this narrative, Meghan's final appeal did not fail simply because one request had been rejected. It failed because the institution itself had changed. William's approach had changed. Harry's relationship with the palace had changed. For years, the monarchy had often appeared to leave difficult situations unresolved, allowing time to do what formal apologies could not. This time, however, the door seemed to close completely, and people everywhere believed they had heard it. Meghan reportedly came to understand that the rejection represented something larger than a single disappointing answer. Her final appeal referred to the last private request seeking restored access, limited recognition, and a carefully managed path back into palace life. Palace life has always represented far more than official titles or invitations. It represents belonging to the daily rhythm of the royal family, where presence carries meaning and absence speaks just as loudly. According to this version of events, Meghan would not regain that place through private appeals, emotional arguments, or limited participation in family occasions. The refusal itself had become the new reality. William appeared to carry the consequences of that decision without celebrating it. His reported refusal became a defining moment because it suggested the future monarchy would place long-term stability ahead of personal emotion whenever those two priorities could no longer exist together. From that perspective, clear boundaries mattered because uncertainty had repeatedly created new disagreements, while exceptions often led to fresh public debates. William may have strengthened his authority, but he also deepened the distance between himself and Harry. Harry, in turn, now faced the reality that the royal life he once knew no longer seemed to be waiting for him. Charles remained publicly silent, and many people interpreted that silence as a message of its own. Whether as a father or as king, he did not appear to challenge William's reported decision. Catherine's quiet support beside William also carried symbolic weight within this story. From William's perspective, protecting his family, including George, Charlotte, and Louis, had become inseparable from protecting the monarchy's future. In the end, the reported outcome seemed clear. Meghan's appeal had reached its conclusion. William's authority appeared stronger. Harry's separation felt even deeper. Charles remained silent. Catherine stood beside the future, and the monarchy entered what many viewed as a new chapter, one where private forgiveness and official royal access were treated as two very different things.